We're fortunate enough to be joined by Congressman Rick Larsen. Congressman Larsen represents Washington's 2nd Congressional District, where ferries, ports, aviation, maritime activity, rail, roads, water infrastructure, cross-border commerce, and working communities shape daily life. He's served on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee since coming to Congress in 2001 and is the committee's ranking member. That role gives him a direct hand in the systems that move people, goods, services, and opportunity across our nation. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So we've been grounding today's conversation in a simple idea that critical infrastructure is about people. With you, I'd like to turn to the clearest ways that Americans experience infrastructure every day and how the country moves, connects, trades, and responds and grows. So the theme of this conversation is connecting America. And your district gives you a concrete view of what connection means in daily life. Talked a lot about those systems at the start, and I'd like to get your perspective. When you hear the phrase connecting America, what does that mean to you in practical terms? And what does it say for the communities you represent and for the country?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. I appreciate it very much. As noted, my district has a lot going on. We're it's the 2nd Congressional District. If you want to think about the 2nd Congressional District in terms of geography, it's say it's north of Seattle, none of Seattle, because everyone kind of believes they know where Seattle is, and it's not on the border. In fact, if you fly into SeaTac Airport and drive to Vancouver, you basically, once you leave Seattle, you're in my district, and you're still nowhere near the border. So you got a long way to go. 780,000 people live there. I get to represent them. You missed the ferries, the largest ferry system in the country as well, by passenger and vehicles. Just doing a pitch for my the great ferry system there. So one of the reasons I've stayed on the infrastructure committee, I got elected in 2001 or 2000, was because I thought that investing in infrastructure is a basic quality of life issue for the people I represent. And getting to your Connecting America, being able to safely connect people, whether they're traveling by car, by bus transit, by rail, by plane, by ferry, by other modes, is extremely important. It's one thing, the reason our transportation system can work is not because it moves people and goods, it's because it moves people and goods safely. And that's our role in the committee. If we have great examples of transportation modes not moving people safely, and when that happens, it undermines the value and the credibility of these investments that we make in order to connect people, connect families, connect them to work, connect them to shopping, connect them to school. So this is, again, it's a fundamental premise of mine that we're about moving people and goods safely, not just moving them, period. And so that connecting them helps move our economy, it helps move our communities together, keep them together, and a lot of times it can provide us something to grab onto as something we can be proud of when we do it well. And we're constantly trying to do it well.
Well, transportation is certainly one way in which policy becomes tangible. People feel it in whether they can go to work, move goods, respond to emergencies, and rely on the systems around them. The committee is working through the next surface transportation reauthorization. You and Chairman Gray, or you and Ranking Member Graves.
I'm ranking member. He's chair. Yeah.
He's chair. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Is working through, or you recently released the bipartisan Building Unrivaled Infrastructure and Long-Term Development for America's 250th Act, or the Build America Act.
Just call it Build America too. I don't even know what the build means, so yeah.
So, the Build America Act.
Yeah.
tip to whoever comes up with these acronyms. But it's a 5-year bill that reaches across highways, bridges, transit, rail, safety, freight, ferries, project, delivery, workforce, innovation, and transportation technology.
Pretty small bill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think next to the NDAA, or is this
Probably.
Yeah.
Ours is only 1,000 pages.
Yeah. So, what should people understand about the stakes of getting that bill done on time and in a bipartisan way?
Well, you'd like to think transportation and infrastructure is bipartisan, and our committee on transportation and infrastructure does have a reputation as being bipartisan, and we really try to do that. And not for its own sake, but I tell people, when you're building and repairing things, it's kind of easy to leave the garbage and the baggage outside the door, instead of in other committees where it's a requirement to bring garbage and baggage inside the door. We tell people, if you want to be on TV in the District of Columbia, there are committees for that. If you want to be on TV in your district, we're the committee for that. And we are, Sam and I really try to convey that message to let people know that we can help you go home and talk about the things you did and things you got in this committee. And it helps move bills along, which is great, but it also helps us build bills, build legislation that we can safely count on attacking and addressing policy things that we need to address. So on Build America 250, to the extent that we can, like I'm in the minority, and we were in the majority when we did the bipartisan infrastructure law in 21. Had the presidency. So this bill has to be a little bit different just because politics change, but it does continue a lot of what we've built on in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And that's important because you've got states who are putting together their own transportation budgets that rely on some federal money. You got companies throughout the country who are relying on a consistent source of funding for building and repairing that next generation infrastructure. And you got the women and men who are doing that work in construction, in planning and design, in engineering, who are relying on these dollars. Because these dollars don't come from, some members think that the dollars come from the sky. They just magically appear, and like, why do we do this at all? It's like, it's happening because we are doing it. And it's sometimes flummoxing to me to have to explain this to some members, not all of them, but some members of Congress. And so continuing that investment is extremely incredible because, one, we're never going to ever stop having roads, bridges, highways, transit, rail to invest in, because you're always going to invest in at least preservation and maintenance, repair, but you also need to replace, and that's kind of the reason we're doing all this. That's some pretty high level stuff. There's a lot of particulars in this bill, but I think that's generally what we're trying to do. I would say I would have written it somewhat differently, not totally differently. It wouldn't be an upside down change. I would have had more emphasis on some things and not the others. But this is compromise. And overall, I think members can go home and say, not only did I get this for the district, not an earmark, but I worked on these issues to help us here. But overall, it's a pretty good bill. It's like, it's pretty good. Yeah. It's not great, but it's all right.
It's compromise.
It's compromise.
Yeah. And so, well, and I want to pull the thread on that a little bit, just in terms of, like, you've communicated so well, so many of the principles that have to go into building bipartisan consensus, because that extends the longevity of things. And I want to get your thinking on, oftentimes, I don't think it's comparable, but a contrasting with China. China plans for 50 years or 75 years. We have a difficult time. Every 2 years, folks are up for re-election. Every 4 years, the president's up for re-election. Every 6 years, the senators. So we have constant change. When you're talking about infrastructure bills, these things take, 5, 10, 15, 20 years to build out. How does that change how you think about it and lead in this space in the Congress and the principles that you need to take into these bills?
Well, the way we think about it on the committee, there are a few bills that we do every 2 years, and generally bipartisan, like the Water Resources Development Act. Anyone? No, okay. This is about ports, it's about the Corps of Engineers, and we do that every 2 years. But when it comes to the federal aviation bill, it's like every 4 years. For the surface, we call the surface bill, roads, bridges, highways, transit, rail. It's like every 5 years to kind of get beyond that election cycle issue. We're not going to plan for 50 years nationally. But you do have local governments, state governments planning 10, 15 years out. You need, for those who track this stuff, states have 20-year TIPs, transportation improvement programs. I was a county elected official. You got a 5-year TIP, you got a 10-year TIP, and you put your projects in those TIPs, these transportation improvement programs, to show that you're ready to accept federal money and use federal money or state money if it's a local government to move these things along. So that planning does take place, but it takes place in a very distributed model in the United States, more so than, say, a country that's very much top-down like China or other places, frankly. But it is important that we continue to act, and I know you want to get into the innovation side a little bit, and we need to start thinking additionally, not differently, but additionally. I mentioned roads, bridges, highways, transit, rail. I mentioned aviation, we mentioned ferries, I mentioned ports with water resources and so on. But underlying all this is something that we on the committee have to start thinking more about, and that is the underlying infrastructure to the underlying infrastructure in many ways is how do we use technology in the future to ultimately on our committee, it's not to impress people with the whiz-bang technology. How is that technology going to be used to improve safety of the traveling public, of moving goods and services and people around the country? And we're organized in a way on committee that is sort of like we're organized by mode. Highways and transit, by rail. There's a pipeline safety and hazardous materials. There's a aviation subcommittee. There's a public buildings and emergency management subcommittee. And there's a water subcommittee on water resources. So we are organized by mode, and we're not organized horizontally. But horizontally, there are issues at each of those modes that we on the committee are going to have to start considering in terms of how we can build more safely, how we can move people more safely, and a lot of that has to do with this oncoming technology and use of these technologies.
I mean, that's certainly, just to maybe pull the thread on that a little bit. Many in this room hail from a cybersecurity sort of focus, and then so much of the space. I have a friend that worked at one of the self-driving vehicle companies. We'll leave it nameless, but he said, our code is steel. And when you start thinking about, so much of the digital world is being so tightly integrated into our physical world, and it's directly into our core transportation elements. You foot stomped safety a few times there, and we've had a very difficult time. I think our community, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I will at least speak for myself here, is that we've had a difficult time securing the digital domain. And now that it's being so tightly integrated into the physical domain, that has to come with pause. And how do you think?
So I want to, again, the reason I hit safety is because there's security and there's safety. Okay? Security of the data, security of the network you're using. I don't want to, it's extremely important, and it's not my jurisdiction. Right? However, it impacts the ability to move people safely. So as we think about like this bill, and talk about jurisdiction committees, there's a committee, Energy and Commerce, where a lot of this stuff does take place. They're also responsible for the safety of cars, but on the Transportation Committee, we're not. We're responsible for the safety of trucks and hazardous materials moving in trucks and larger commercial vehicles, school buses, things like that, but not cars. But that said, in this bill that we passed out of committee, we have the first autonomous vehicle framework for commercial vehicles that's been written and passed any committee. And but it only applies to the things that's in our jurisdiction. But still, like if we're going to move into autonomous vehicle safety framework, how do we use them safely on the road? What does that mean? You know, we're focused on that set of issues as they apply to trucks and buses and so on. And kind of relying, if you will, on you all, working with other committees to ensure that the data that's moving back and forth, the bits and bytes that are moving, the electrons that are moving back and forth, are secure so that these vehicles can operate safely. We work on like a little bit like public acceptance. Like public won't accept these things on the road unless they can feel safe about using them. So in the AV safety framework, we're actually requiring a human driver, and if you're transporting hazardous materials in an autonomous vehicle truck, like I don't want to be the guy driving next to that. Honestly, I don't, and I would never want to make that suggestion. That would be a career-limiting endeavor in my business. If I told my public, "Oh, you should feel absolutely safe," they probably should, and they'd turn me out of office for saying something crazy. So, what is the safety element of that? So, human driver, human backup driver, hazard materials, human backup driver in larger commercial vehicles, or in school buses, a transit bus. Now, I've been on a transit rail without humans. Without a human driver in Hawaii. Worked fine. Would you want that on a transit bus when you have maybe passengers on a transit bus who aren't being very safe for the other passengers on that transit bus and no one responsible for the safety inside that? No, I wouldn't. So like that's probably not a great idea to have a transit bus without a human driver, someone responsible for the safety of others. So there's things that we are looking at, but the technology is coming. So I'm not being a Luddite here. Technology is coming, but again, I get back to if you have a really whiz bang idea, leave the whiz bang outside and bring the idea. And the idea is how does idea help move people and goods safely? That's my pitch.
That's incredibly insightful, and I want to pivot for a minute to sort of zoom out a bit. Transportation as sort of an economic and a national security, like how it all fits. So, and transportation underpins supply chains, military mobility, emergency response, economic competitiveness, and national resilience. When transportation systems strain, the effects move quickly through the economy and into people's lives. How do you think about transportation policy as economic and national security policy?
I think of it mostly as economic policy. Transportation equals jobs. You build roads, bridges, highways, transit, rail. That's women and men going to work every day to build those things. You build roads, bridges, highways, transit, rail. That's women and men who run companies and working companies, moving goods and services safely and efficiently across the transportation network, which then hopefully, if gas prices weren't so high, would play into the price that people pay for those goods and services as well. So if we aren't taking care of supply chains, if we aren't investing in our ports and efficient use of our ports, and if we aren't investing in our roads, bridges, highways, transit, rail, we've seen what supply chain shocks mean. Most recently, with closing of the Strait of Hormuz and what it means in gas prices, but during COVID, what those supply chain shocks meant in terms of prices of goods and services, a worldwide impact on inflation. We know we have specific examples of what it means to have a supply chain that doesn't work, and so these investments are important to having a good supply chain. Just a few days ago, I had a classified briefing with the head of Transcom, which is a transportation command within our military, where we were able to talk through the national security elements of the bill, of our bill. So 26 years, it's the first time I've ever had the military sit down with me to talk. Cory, he can't pitch me and say, like, you really need to pass this. But he can say, if you're to pass this, this is how it would help, right? He can educate me on things. He can't lobby me on these things. But there are serious national security elements to having a a transportation system that can be available for our military to move things where they need to move them as well. They just aren't, I don't know what the percentage is, but I assure you there's military movements on our publicly used roads and transportation systems every day in the United States. I'm sure some of you know that. And they need to have a system that continues to work efficiently and safely to move things where they need to be when they need to be there.
That's so, and it brings one of the themes for today for us is that everything that we're doing is really about impacting people, improving their lives, making their lives a little bit better by every little measure. We open with a workforce panel with Representative Walkinshaw, and one of the CEOs that is with us. And modern infrastructure depends on people. It depends on a workforce. It depends on engineers, operators, controllers, cyber professionals, builders, local officials, maintainers. When you look at the transportation at the level that you do, as the national level, what workforce gaps are you most focused on, and what makes infrastructure one of the remaining spaces where bipartisan work can still produce durable results?
Yeah. So think about infrastructure writ large. If you're in aviation, the workforce shortage is in aviation manufacturing people and aviation or maintenance techs. So nothing, it's not the brainiacs, and God bless the brainiacs, but I need really smart people who can read a blueprint and even online and put a plane together. And we don't have enough of those. I need folks who can read the plans of a complex airplane and repair it, and we don't have enough of those folks. And if you don't have that, and that's a supply, these women and men are part of the supply chain, and they see themselves as an important part of it as well, and we don't have enough investment in that. And that's not a 4-year degree for some of these folks. It's a 2-year degree. It's an apprenticeship. A lot of that as well in roads, bridges, and highways. It's those women and men who you drive by when on the freeway when it's maybe down to 20 miles an hour because they're doing repairs or they're putting in improvements in culverts or so on. There's an age problem in that cohort as well. People getting ready to retire, and so tying these infrastructure projects to apprenticeship opportunities as well. So you're training that generation of folks, next generation of folks, is incredibly important. I will note on air traffic control, not I won't say a lot, but certainly a fair number of air traffic controllers took the early retirement, or it wasn't early for a lot of them. They were past retirement when they wanted to retire, and took it. And shame on all of us in Congress for not seeing this problem every year for 20 years, knowing the problem was coming. We're going to have this large cohort of air traffic controllers being eligible to leave, and some of them took it. And we need to have a pipeline of training for ATC, air traffic control, that complements the investments that the administration wants to make in air traffic control modernization, which is a lot of bits and bytes and electrons and a lot of wires, a lot of technology getting out there. But we need to pair that with ensuring that there's people in those towers and in the repair side, maintenance side, to supply that. So, we reckon, at least in transportation, I think we're largely recognizing the need to have these folks. And this piece is in place to help support the creation, of this continuing the next generation of people. But the investment, the dollars need to be put in place for that.
I want to, as we get close to the end of our time together, at ICIT, we always come back to a human question. How does this work help people live safer, stronger, freer, more stable lives? So in 5 or 10 years, what should Americans feel in their daily lives if we get transportation policy right? What should the folks in Washington's second congressional...
That Rick Larsen guy did his job. But they probably won't. Hopefully they think somebody did their job. It's a pretty anonymous job working on transportation, frankly. I think that I would say, look, we passed the bipartisan infrastructure law, and at the time, President Biden, he was a rail guy and wanted to do all things infrastructure, and so we did all things infrastructure. What we're doing in our bill is half of that, because it's just our jurisdiction. It's not the broadband side, it's not the water side, it's not the port side. We're doing roads, bridges, highways, transit, rail, and some cats and dogs. And so there's another $500 to $600 billion of work that our committee isn't doing because it's not in our jurisdiction, and we're not getting particular leadership on those issues out of this administration. And I wish we did. I've talked to the administration about this. It's not a big, I'm breaking a pick on it. It's just that we ought to be doing that. So I think in 5 to 10 years, what I'd like what folks to see is actually not see it, what to understand is that by building and repairing now, we're going to get another 90 years out of that thing that we built and repaired. People start thinking that way, because we always think of the inconvenience of the road getting repaired now, or the bridge getting repaired or replaced right now, and it's wholly inconvenient. But now we'll never have to do that thing again. And if we can start training folks to think about that, one, it gives us on the committee a little bit more space to maneuver. But second, it is true. Getting people to think longer term about what these investments means they don't have to see this investment again in their lifetime. Can I end with one example of that? I got 2 bridges on Mukilteo Boulevard in my district. Doesn't matter where it is. It's in my district. That's the important part. We replaced one bridge. It just opened up. Harry Truman built it in 1946. Like, he was there personally and built it. No, it's got the Keystone, 1946. That bill, Edgewater Creek, that bridge replaced in part with BIL money, and it opened up in April, about 5 months late. It was, too bad. It was really unfortunate. But 1946, and it's 2026. So the math is like 70, 80 years, right? That's 80 years? 80 years, okay, 80 years. So I assure you, we got our taxpayers' money worth out of that original bridge, 80 years. And people screaming and yelling about, like, are we going to replace this? What are we going to do for a year? It's like, I don't know, but I know what you're going to do for the next 80 years. You're going to be driving across a bridge that will last at least that long, and it won't be a 1946 design. And people, then folks will think, yeah, I don't know how they built it in 46, but I feel better about how they built it now. I'm going to use the same argument for the same road that Herbert Hoover built in 1929. I don't know why we replaced the 1946 one first and the 1929 second, but that's what's going to happen, and it's going to be extremely inconvenient for people. But on that one, whatever 80 plus, it's at 17 years, quick math, 97 years. That thing's 100 years old, let's say, and we'll have to replace that again. I want people to start thinking about, and if you amortize that for every time you drive over that bridge, right, it might cost this much now, but by the time you've driven over that thing, and your kids have driven over that thing, and your grandkids have driven over that thing, the cost per travel is like 6 cents every time you cross. Not the $1 billion whatever, not the $45 million it costs, but like 6 cents. I mean, it's going to be. I want people to start thinking about that. But then we always got the next thing to do too, the next thing to invest in.
Well, Congressman, thank you for your time. You have an unenviable position trying to get at a nation, a people that is raised on social media thinking not beyond the next 6 seconds or the next 6 minutes, but the next 6 decades.
Right.
So you're doing a wonderful job. And
well, I would say, and over the next 6 weeks, be rooting for the U.S. men's national team in the World Cup. I'm always pitching. Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot.
We appreciate it. Thank you. The people of Washington's 2nd Congressional are lucky to have you, as are the rest of us. Thank you for joining us.
Appreciate it. Thanks.